And President Trump also weighed in on North Korea this morning from his golf club in New Jersey. The president took to Twitter, writing, quote, "After many years of failure, countries are coming together to finally address the dangers posed by North Korea. We must be tough and decisive." A CBS News poll out this morning shows most Americans are worried that North Korea's nuclear weapons program could lead to war. 72% say they are uneasy about a possible conflict. Only 35% are confident in President Trump's ability to handle the situation. So let's bring in Olivier Knox. He is chief Washington correspondent for Yahoo News, and he joins me now from our Washington bureau. Thanks for joining us, Olivier.
Thanks for having me.
We will begin with North Korea and these new sanctions imposed by the United Nations. What are we going to be watching for when it comes to enforcement? It's not like we haven't seen sanctions before.
You're right. What we are seeing, though, this time is unanimity on the United Nations Security Council. And you're seeing public statements from China, from its foreign minister, saying that China is ready to pay the heaviest price for these sanctions. That's a little bit unusual. The things to watch for in enforcement are going to be, first and foremost, China. No country does more business with North Korea than China. It's effectively the smaller country's patron. We're going to be watching that. But we're also going to be watching Russia, which over the last 6 months or so has taken advantage of Chinese enforcement of previous sanctions to do what's called backfilling. In other words, where a Chinese company's pulled out of doing business, a Russian company has come in to do business. We're also going to watch the rest of the region. North Korea has historically done business through front companies scattered throughout Southeast Asia. And so that's, as you introed Secretary of State Tillerson's travels in the area, that's a really important thing to keep in mind. There are some countries with banking secrecy laws where American intelligence officials and Treasury officials believe North Korea does business. On all of these fronts, we're going to be watching for better enforcement, better coherence, and frankly, much needed pressure.
So the president didn't just take to Twitter to praise countries and their cooperation. He also retweeted something from Fox News, a story about North Korea moving cruise missiles to a patrol boat off the country's east coast. Should we be taking this retweet as confirmation of this intelligence? How should we be assessing this?
I think a lot of people in our line of work are going to be calling up the White House and other parts of the government to ask that exact question. You know, there's the protocol on Twitter that retweets aren't endorsements. But in this case, of course, there's a measure of irony in the President of the United States, who just recently was denouncing both anonymous sources and national security leaks, retweeting a story that's anchored on, well, anonymous sources and national security leaks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, indeed. And, you know, here we are again sort of facing that dilemma of should this be an official statement from the president that he's tweeting out? I mean, how do we really sort of take this in? But I want to ask you about something else. We have a new CBS News poll out this morning. And once again, the president's approval rating remains pretty low. In fact, historically low, 36%. What's the impact of that number on the president's legislative agenda, though? You know, up until now, in fact, even now, Republicans, senators, congressmen, they have not been particularly critical of some of the things that the president has done. But if his ratings continue to stay at this level, could we see Congress maybe being a little more vocal?
Well, we could. The problem with a poll like that, with a poll finding like that, is that it doesn't really drill down into the most important numbers, which are not so much his approval ratings among all Americans, but among Republicans.
Right.
And you know, as long as his core voters are a majority of Republicans, and if you're a Republican up for re-election in 2018, you know, that's the number you're looking for. You want to see how many of your voters are still with the president. And so that's why we're not seeing too much. I will say over the past 6 months, we haven't seen much evidence that when his poll numbers were higher, his legislative agenda was proceeding any more smoothly. Mm-hmm. But that's the number to watch. It's not the overall approval. It's how many Republicans and how many Trump voters still stand with the president.
Yeah, and thus far, his approval rating within the Republican Party, those who voted Republican, it's still pretty high. It's dipping, but it's still pretty high.
It is dipping, and that's something to watch very closely.
So lastly, Olivier, I want to ask you about this continued back and forth between the president and Senator Richard Blumenthal. People may recall the president blasted Blumenthal yesterday on Twitter over his war record after the senator went on TV to defend Robert Mueller's investigation. It's not the first time the president has been critical of Blumenthal's war record. Blumenthal spoke out this morning. So let's listen to what he had to say, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
There is an ongoing special counsel investigation. It is real. It is based on facts. That's where the issue is. That's where the focus ought to be. Our national security and the rule of law are at serious risk. So it is not about me. I cannot explain the president's obsession with me or any of the other targets of his tweets.
So people may or may not remember Senator Blumenthal was caught in a little bit of, if you want to call it a lie, it said that he served in the Vietnam War. He'd actually served in the Marine Reserves, I believe. It did not serve in the Vietnam War. That's what the president was bringing up. What do you make of this back and forth, Olivier?
It's not about Senator Blumenthal. It's about Bob Mueller, who's carrying out that independent investigation. Senator Blumenthal may have temporarily gotten to the president's head, but the real issue here is how much the president views the Russia story, as he calls it, as an improper effort to delegitimize his presidency. And he responds very forcefully to any suggestion, that Bob Mueller is doing the Lord's work with this investigation. He takes it very personally, and that's what you saw yesterday. I don't think it had anything to do with Senator Blumenthal. I'm sure if you saw Senator Schumer on the same shows making the same points, we would have had a barrage of tweets from the president about Senator Schumer. So it's less about Senator Blumenthal and a lot more about Bob Mueller.
Olivier Knox of Yahoo News. Thank you so much, Olivier.
Thanks for having me.